Wednesday, February the 13th. If you've been in the library, his sunset silhouette pictures of our beach are on the wall. He is a photographer for that. He will be here to discuss the art of photography next month. So we will begin tonight with our Peter Gurevich is here to introduce our speakers. He is the president of Solana Beach Community Connections, and he's also UCSD Professor Emeritus. So please welcome Peter.
Thanks, everybody. It's my very great pleasure to introduce our speakers for this evening. As part of our series, as our president of Friends has explained, we have a series and we divide it into two parts and we try to alternate them. We have one chain of talks which has to do with public affairs. We've had talks about relations with China or the war in Ukraine and things like that. And then we have another bunch of talks that has to do with aging in place and getting old and things like that, which many of us with gray hair and not such gray hair are doing. And so tonight is part of our series in Aging in Place. And I'm delighted to have to introduce our two speakers. And they are both lawyers and they work with an organization which provides assistance to people in legal things. And I won't try to, they belong to an organization which is very valuable. I won't try to explain what the organization does because that's their job. This evening we were motivated by the thought that our comparable organization in Del Mar did a program about legal issues that confront seniors, and so we thought with all the scams that you read about, all the things that everybody's subject to, the difficult things go on, we thought it'd be great to do that for us here. And so I found out about Jaime, and Jaime brought along Caleb. So it's my pleasure to introduce them to you. They have Jaime is a graduate of McGill, and I have the funny little distinction. I once taught at McGill. I taught at McGill before I came here to UCSD. McGill is in Montreal, for those of you for whom that's too far away. He also has if I recall, you will have a BA from McGill and a law degree from McGill, but in between you got a master's degree from SAIS at Johns Hopkins.
Hard to hear you.
Sorry, I will chain it up. Oh, I'll go to, we have a microphone. That's right, we have a microphone. I will go to the microphone, which makes it easier than my lecturing voice. Oh gosh. Okay, so in addition to that, he has in between those bachelor's degree and the law degree, he got a degree from a master's degree from SAIS in International Affairs. SAIS is the International Affairs School that belongs to Johns Hopkins in Washington. So he's very well trained. He's the director of the legal program that he'll talk to you about. His colleague is Caleb Logan. Caleb has a bachelor's from UCSD as a Bachelor of Science, and then he also got a master's degree in science. In what, biology was it?
Electrical engineering.
Electrical engineering, I got that way wrong. Electrical engineering, and then he decided to get a law degree, which he got from Duke. So here are two very well-trained people who are doing remarkable things, I think, a service to the community and doing a public law and public affairs and trying to help people. And so I'm delighted to have them with us this evening in talking to you about the issues that confront all of us in possible ways of getting scammed or taken advantage of out there, and what we can all do about it. So it's my pleasure to have them be with you tonight, Jaime and Caleb.
I was told that. Can we raise this a bit?
Thanks.
All right. So thank you, Peter, and thank you to everyone who's hosting us here tonight. I did manage to bring Caleb, who's really a big part of what elder law and advocacy is handling right now. When it comes to elder abuse and scams, Caleb has taken on the litigation program. So we're building a program at Elder Law and Advocacy. For many years, we've been suing nursing homes for abuse and neglect, but we haven't had a program that just is addressing elder abuse. And so we can talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Can we go to the first slide? Elder Law and Advocacy is a nonprofit organization. We've been around since 1978, and we're funded by a lot of different sources. Probably about over 70% of our funding is somehow through the state. So Aging and Independent Services, or directly from the state or the Bar Association. And then we also apply for lots of grants and accept donations and try to find whatever support we can. Next slide, please. We have a lot of different programs. I'm not going to go through each one. Our biggest programs are the legal services programs. So we have a very high volume of clients. We don't charge for any of our services. In the legal services program, we see 3,000 to 4,000 clients a year. And then we have a health insurance counseling and advocacy program that helps with Medicare and supplemental health insurance counseling, which has been a very important program this year because there was a data breach at Scripps, and I think they released 67,000 records of individuals and they had to shut things down. So that was one issue, and then there was another issue when was it Sharp that dropped the supplemental? They dropped a program, and Scripps. Okay, Scripps sent 32,000 emails to those patients, telling them that they should call Elder Law and Advocacy to get guidance. So the HICAP, Health Insurance Counseling and Advocacy Program, has been very busy this year. And then we have a lot of other programs. We work on homelessness prevention. As I said, we sue nursing homes for abuse and neglect. And we're expanding our elder abuse litigation program. Caleb is key to that. And we also run an elder abuse restraining order program where we help people get restraining orders if they're being abused. All right, well, these are some of our sponsors. I don't think we have to go into detail on this slide, so let's just go to the next. All right, now this is foreshadowing because I'm going to turn it over to Caleb now, and he's going to go through a lot of the kinds of scams that seniors are facing right now, and then we're going to get to the technology part. And this is the part that, I just put up that 23andMe and LastPass had severe data breaches, which means that those two companies released millions, I believe, millions of records of their clients, and the clients have had very little recourse. But I'm going to get into that after Caleb introduces the concepts here tonight. So Caleb, go right ahead.
Thanks, Jamie, and thank you all for having us here tonight. So one of the things that we'll be talking about today is that seniors are disproportionately targeted for scams, and it's estimated by the National Center on Elder Abuse that there are as many as 6 million cases of abuse in the US each year. Now, California, of course, has a high population of seniors, and we are, in fact, 11% of those cases, it's estimated. It's a real problem to actually figure out how big of an issue it is, though, because 1 in 24 cases are estimated to go unreported. So we know it's a big problem, we don't quite know how big of a problem it is, and that's one of the things that we're trying to figure out. But the goal of this presentation is really to equip you all to avoid being the victim of a scam and avoid being part of those numbers. So one thing to keep in mind, of course, today we're talking about scams which often involve unknown people actually taking advantage of an older adult. But in cases in which the abuser is known, in 90% of those cases, it's a family member or someone who's known to the senior. So as everyone is going about with end-of-life planning, keep in mind you always need someone that you trust when you're ever signing a will, signing a trust, a power of attorney, whatever it may be. Next slide. All right, so I mentioned seniors being disproportionately targeted. One of those reasons is that they can be more vulnerable to persuasion and high pressure sales tactics, especially if you're living on your own. It might be late at night, a contractor might knock on your door and then invite themselves in. It's a very coercive situation, and so that could be an easy way to be taken advantage of there. Also, seniors are less likely to have familiarity with electronics, and a lot of the times people will come by door to door with tablets. So the senior might not be familiar with that technology, they might not know how to actually read through, and the signing software that people actually use just skips through and doesn't even give people an opportunity to sign, so that's another way that it comes out. Also, seniors have typically worked their whole lives, they're more likely to have built up savings, they might own a house, much more likely than younger folks, especially in San Diego. And they'll also have built up credit over their life. That means that they're the perfect target for a scammer. And then also, seniors often can feel a lot of shame at being victimized. That's going back to that number, 1 in 24, it's estimated, of cases go unreported. And so that's another reason that makes them just more ripe for abuse, because if the abuser knows that they're not likely to be held accountable, then there's nothing stopping them from that.
Sorry, we had technical problem in just a moment. We lost our internet.
All right. Well, the next slide that I'm covering is really just an overview. So when we think about scams, the way that's called in the law, it's called elder financial abuse. Some states call it financial exploitation, California says abuse. And so obviously we're talking about scams and frauds tonight, but it can take many different forms. One of those, I mentioned powers of attorney just a little bit ago. You could be misusing powers of attorney for your own gain. Also using general coercion or deception to make an elder transfer assets, whether through a will, a trust, maybe signing up to be a joint account holder, something like that. And that's where we get into the misuse of accounts and credit cards. Oftentimes, instead of a power of attorney or something more secure in the law, people will go about with easier but less secure methods, like making someone a joint account holder. Or just opening a joint credit card account with them, that can then be taken advantage of later on. And at the end of the day, financial abuse can be as simple as stealing cash, stealing valuables. It could even come down to stealing someone's glasses, because it's taking that senior's property. And signs of different financial abuse. So improper influence, that's most commonly seen, and in the law that's called undue influence. That comes through with coercion, different forms of extortion, or building up endearment. Endearment is especially common among family members and caregivers, so they build up trust and then exploit that trust later on when a senior is less suspecting. And also in the caregiver context, there are threats to abandon that care relationship unless the senior, for example, maybe transfers assets to them. Now, I recently heard a house just a little bit down the street from me actually was given to a caregiver by an elderly woman, and although I don't have any reason to suspect that it was abusive, that's the type of thing that we see and that we're wary of, and that you all should be wary of when you're thinking of who your assets are going to when you pass. Oftentimes, the victim or the abuser will exhibit suspicious behavior. Often it's being secret around certain transactions, or maybe not wanting another family member to see different documents that have gone on. For me, I have two siblings. So for example, let's say I suddenly take over my parents' assets and then I say, oh no, you don't need to see their will. I've got that taken care of. Abusive situations like that. And general financial exploitation is, at the end of the day, what we're talking about here. Next slide. So this is actually pulled, I'm sorry it's a little hard to see. I know it's
I'm just wondering if the lights just above that ridge can go off, because that would not shine so much on your slide.
Yes.
That's not their technical control, so.
Do you know? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is a slide from the Federal Trade Commission, and don't worry, I'll walk through it. I know that it's hard to see. The Federal Trade Commission is the federal agency that tracks scams most heavily, and they actually break down the data by age groups. And so the age that's highlighted in the blue, if you can tell, is the 70 to 79 age group. And this data is actually pretty interesting because it shows that seniors, especially 80 and over, are less likely to fall for scams, but when they do, they lose significantly more. So that's why it's that much more important. Even if seniors are less likely to fall for it, it's much more devastating because they will lose more, and then being unable to return for work or to work, it makes it harder to build up assets further on, whereas someone younger can go back to work. They can hopefully rebuild some of that money that was taken from them. And this is actually pretty interesting. For the 70 to 79 age group, it says that the most common issue is online shopping, which is not something that we're typically seeing, but what we do see is further on down. So there are business imposters.
That helps a lot. Thank you.
So business imposters, tech support scams, different issues like that I'll be talking about in just a little bit. Also, the number one issue for how money is actually taken is through credit cards for this age demographic, but second most common is gift cards. And as a category, that's a huge issue of what we're seeing these days, and I'll again talk about that later. And we're talking about the role of technology. Still though, oftentimes people aren't using the internet. The number one method of communication right now is phone calls. And we can go to the next slide. So this is just a list of the common elder fraud schemes that I'll be getting into. It starts with tech support scams, romance scams. There's a whole host of them, and we won't be able to cover them all tonight, but this is just designed to give you an overview of the different types that are out there. So starting with the tech support scam, this is when criminals pose as a tech support representative and they'll offer to fix a non-existent computer issue. Sometimes it can be through a pop-up on your computer or tablet, whatever device you're using, and they'll say, oh, you have a virus, let me fix that. All of a sudden, down the road, that leads to them getting remote access to your device. Through that, they can transfer money to themselves, steal other personal identifying information and commit identity theft, and ultimately compromise your accounts. With the romance scam, this is something that we're expecting to see become more of an issue today. This especially pertains to seniors because as people are looking for companions later in life, they can be taken advantage of through online relationships. Especially today with the rise of artificial intelligence, people are able to use voice cloning software to sound like someone they're not. They're able to spoof phone numbers. They're able to make fake videos. So all of these different ways can be manipulated to actually make a scammer seem like someone they're not. And with the romance scam, they'll actually just pose as a romantic partner, say, I need X amount of money. Sometimes they might say that they're in trouble, something's going on in their life, and they just need the money right now being the key, because they often like to exert pressure so that you can't think clearly. And so, again, something to keep in mind as the elderly look to find companions later in life. There are also fake relative scams. These are often called grandparent scams, but it doesn't only affect grandparents. Really, it's anyone posing as a family member trying to take advantage of that relationship. So for example, it could be your grandson is in the hospital, or there's a well-publicized story about a lawyer actually whose son called him and said, I'm in jail, this is my only call, you can't reach me after I hang up, and suddenly he needed to wire $10,000. And of course, the scammer was using voice cloning software to make it sound like it was actually the man's son calling. So with these, again, they're exerting pressure to minimize the amount of time that you will take to think through and actually process what's going on. That just makes it more likely that the scam will succeed. On the next slide. So with phishing, this is something that we see very commonly, especially, again, as artificial intelligence grows, it's just going to become even worse. This is where people pose as legitimate institutions, so it could be your bank, especially, is what we see most commonly. And they'll email you, they'll call you or text you, and they'll try to get sensitive data like your banking information, your account details, your passwords, information like that that are used to then access your account and steal your identity and cause other financial loss. Oftentimes, it'll be through something that sounds too good to be true. So for example, you've won the lottery, but you need to make a payment to unlock the prize. Something that often is unsolicited and that you haven't actually looked for in the past. They'll, as always, give a sense of urgency, saying, for example, and this is a weird one, they'll say things like, I'm in a meeting and I need help getting Amazon gift cards right now. Always putting that sense of urgency just to minimize your ability to think. With the hyperlinks in these emails, texts, whatever it may be, look for spelling errors. That's the most common way to see an issue. They're often not crafted that well. They're just waiting for people to miss those errors and actually click on something and, get down the rabbit hole of that sense of urgency. If something looks suspicious, don't click on it, especially when there's an attachment. Attachments can easily hold viruses. And when in doubt, visit the source directly. There's nothing stopping you from calling your bank directly, looking at the number online or on the back of your card, and that way finding out directly from the source whether something is authentic or not. At work, we commonly get targeted with scams, and we're always reaching out to each other. In fact, I was recently testing a feature at work that I had no idea, but it sent an email out to everyone. And so I got several emails, hey Caleb, is this actually from you? Should I be clicking on this? And so it's things like that, just that we want to be alert for when something looks suspicious, treat it as such. And then with impersonation scams, this is more in the government context. People will actually pose as government employees. They'll threaten to arrest you, they'll threaten to prosecute you. I know I had a client who said that someone had used money from his account to purchase child pornography in a different country. So again, things that are very, very serious, and ordinarily no one would want to be in trouble for things like this, to heighten that sense of pressure, get you to wire money without thinking about it. And this one is interesting just because it was actually 2020's most common fraud strategy. And again, it will often involve an uncommon payment method like gift cards. On the next slide, we are going right down the line with home repair scams. This is an issue that we also see commonly with door-to-door contractors. One of the things that if you remember something, I hope you remember to always deal with licensed contractors. Something that I am very vocal about, just because criminals can just show up at your door. They say that they'll do work. They'll write out a fake contract that looks authentic, and then they'll take your money and leave without actually doing anything. We also have TV and radio scams where criminals will target victims with illegitimate advertisements about legitimate services. So these could be reverse mortgages, they could be credit repair services. And with these, similar to phishing attempts where you can go directly to the source when you're in doubt, just find a reliable dealer that you trust, and that way you can avoid these types of situations. So, for example, with credit repair, you don't need someone to do that for you. That's something you can do yourself. You can work with creditors directly. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. And if you owe money, you don't need someone to negotiate that with a creditor on your behalf. You can do that directly with them yourself. So in these situations, it's really services that sound too good to be true and are really not necessary. And then finally, the family and caregiver scam, where relatives take advantage of you. That can be through threats, going back to the caregiving relationship, for example, threatening to end that caregiving relationship unless you do something, transfer some assets, whatever it may be. Or just isolation, keeping you from friends, keeping you from other family, keeping, for example, answering the phone for you and saying that you don't want to talk to someone who you actually do. All of these situations can be leveraged by someone. And then, on the next slide, we have reimbursement scams. So in these situations, they'll say, similar to the phishing type scenario, someone will reach out to you and say that you've signed up for a service already, that you need to be reimbursed for it, or at least they expect you to naturally want to be reimbursed for it. So you reach out to them, they say, oh, that's no problem, we'll refund you your money. And then, in the process of refunding you that money, they make an error. For example, oh, I'm so sorry, I put in 2 extra zeros and now your account has been credited with $36,000 instead of $360. I need you to transfer me that money back right away or else I'll get fired, and you can't tell anyone these situations. And then, of course, it can go on for several loops. They'll say, so you send $36,000, but all of a sudden, for some reason, that transfer didn't work out. And now you need to send double the amount. It often doesn't make sense when I talk about it in these simple terms, but when you're under the circumstances and the influence of that stress, you just can't think clearly, and it's really easy to get caught in that cycle unless you get a chance to actually think through what you're doing and realize that it is a scam. Gift card scams can really take many forms. There's no one way that I could describe it to you, but the basic idea is that someone will be asking you to pay for something with gift cards specifically. So, for example, we had a client who was told, you don't qualify for this loan that you need, but we can help you fix your credit. All you need to do is buy $1,000 of gift cards. We'll wire you $1,000, and then you can give us the gift cards so that we're all even. So he did that, not noticing that they would immediately take the $1,000 that they transferred him right back after he bought the gift cards and gave them to him. Several cycles later, his bank account is empty. So it's these situations where gift cards can often play a dirty role and often aren't to be trusted.
All right.
Caleb had mentioned, well, I'm going on to artificial intelligence. This is the future part of our scams presentation. Something that I always bring up is, yes, these things are targeting seniors, and a lot of these scams do target seniors, but the criminals don't care if you're a senior or not. If you happen to click on one of their links, one of their phishing links, they're happy to steal from anyone. So what's changing right now with artificial intelligence is you're probably no longer going to see the spelling mistakes and the grammatical mistakes in those emails anymore, because those emails are all going to be written by artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is going to duplicate the websites and the emails and the colors and the voices. Anything that you and I can't do perfectly, AI is eventually going to do perfectly. Maybe not today. AI is not perfect yet, and one thing that's come up as attorneys with the Bar Association is, right now, if we rely on artificial intelligence to write a brief or to do any research, it's absolutely imperative that everything gets reviewed by an attorney to make sure that they're not just mistakes and things that are made up. I mean, we've probably all read those stories. But in 5 years, it's going to be malpractice not to use AI. Because in 5 years, we're going to be so far advanced from where we are right now, it's just not going to be reasonable not to use the technology that's available. So as a scammer, AI is a fantastic tool. And as I've put up here, these are the kinds of things that AI can do today. And AI is in its infancy. We've basically just been talking about it for the last year or so. I mean, it's been around in some form for years, but what's happening right now with the access of ChatGPT and ChatGPT-4, and there are many, many other companies that are producing AI platforms. The reality is that whatever those flags were that we're all noticing in emails, they're no longer going to be those flags. So we're going to have to be looking for something else. And really, it's going to have to be some kind of technology watermark that we all end up adopting. I don't know what it's going to be because it doesn't exist yet. But we're going to have to rely on something, because you can't just have a world where you cannot distinguish between real and not real. And that's really where we're headed right now. And so I'm sure Adobe and Microsoft and Apple and every big company is trying to figure out how we're going to get around this obstacle of not being able to distinguish. Next slide, please. And then there are the data breaches. The data breaches, I'm sure everyone here has been a victim of a data breach. I think I've been a victim of about 40 at this point. If you go to, I don't know if I put the website up there, but if you go to, how do you pronounce that? I've been PWNED.
Oh, pwned.
I've been pwned.com or .org. You can see every data breach that you've been part of in the history of data breaches. So I put a few up here. I was just going through some data on data breaches. So first of all, some recent breaches: Boeing, Sony, IBM, American Airlines, the US government, T-Mobile, PayPal, IHG, Facebook. We're talking about the biggest, wealthiest companies in the world, and they can't control this. They are susceptible to these types of breaches, and it ends up being a problem for anybody who does business with these companies. And of course, it's not just the fact that they're releasing our information. When Boeing gets hacked, how do you know what's happening within their company is not going to produce some kind of problem for people who are traveling on their airplanes? The Sharp healthcare breach was 62,777 patients. That's a very, very small breach in terms of the big breaches. I did want to talk about LastPass. Has anyone here used LastPass?
No.
Very fortunate. Oh, Peter, I'm sorry. So LastPass, there are a bunch of password managers. LastPass is one of the biggest ones. Bitwarden is another one. I think there's one called Password One. I'm not sure, but there are a few, and we're all overwhelmed by passwords. Futurists say that passwords will soon be a thing of the past, hopefully, but for the time being, we all have to deal with our banks and with every company that we deal with, and we have, I don't know, 1,000 passwords that we somehow have to manage and keep track of. So this is a way to have usually something that's embedded in your browser that will recognize the website and allow you to safely put in the password. Except if you're using LastPass, it's not safe because they've been hacked more than once. And not only have they been hacked, but they did not disclose it to their victims, who are their customers. I mean, it's crazy. And then Yahoo did the same thing. So 3 billion records in 2013 were breached. They didn't disclose it. I didn't put up the date, but they didn't disclose it for, I think it was at least a year or two. They just didn't tell their customers. And the same thing with Uber. So in 2016, they had a huge breach, 57 million users affected. They released the information in 2022. So now there have been some improvements. I read that the SEC now requires publicly traded companies to include in their annual report if they've been subject to a data breach. So it won't go on for more than a year, but it just seems insane that these giant companies are not disclosing to their victims that their information is just released into the world. And it's really sensitive information. So Equifax, great example. Equifax, you don't have to sign up with Equifax to be a victim of their data breach. We're all part of Equifax. Every US, not just citizens, anyone who does business in the US or transacts in the US has a credit score with Equifax, and they keep track of all of your consumer debt and your consumer history and payments, and they were hacked. Millions and millions of people, including social security numbers. and addresses and phone numbers. 23andMe, which is the company that, I mean, there are a bunch of them now, but they collect genetic information, and then they link it, and they give you information about your history and your genetics and what you're susceptible to in terms of potential medical issues. They were hacked. DNA, their medical information was released, social security numbers, well, not social security numbers with 23andMe, but I mean, personal medical information. And then Marriott, you can see what was released. So the point of this is you can be incredibly careful with how you are handling your life online, or you could try to remove yourself altogether, which is practically impossible. Became impossible during COVID, by the way. I had lots of clients who had basically decided they were going to live the rest of their lives without using computers. And then COVID happened, and you couldn't go to a bank, you couldn't go to most stores for a little while. I mean, everything was closed. You had to start getting online, and this became a huge problem for people who had never used computers before. So all that to say that we're all kind of subject to this, and usually the upshot of this, for companies, it ends up being ransomware. So the people who are stealing this information, either they're using it to extort money, blackmail people, or they're using it to commit identity theft against individuals. So that's one way that you can fight it. I mean, you can get certain types of coverage, insurance coverage that covers you if you're subject to an identity theft situation. I actually just I was reading my automobile insurance policy, and in there, I didn't even know, but I have some identity theft coverage in my automobile insurance, so that was helpful. Next slide, please. So as technology changes, and it's changing faster and faster, as we all know, every technological change becomes a new opportunity for criminals to figure out ways to scam people. And it's not just AI. So PACE loans, which is a type of loan that's been used in predatory lending in California. It's something that we've been fighting for many years, and actually quite successfully at this point. It seems like the issue has at least moderated significantly. But one of the issues for our clients was they would be approached by a contractor who would come to their house with an iPad, and there would be some type of agreement on the iPad, and either the contractor would actually physically sign it with their fingers, so the customer would never actually see the information, or they would just say, just sign here, and then all kinds of information that was not real would be put into the iPad. For example, we had clients who didn't have email addresses, and email addresses were just made up, or they just used their own email address, the contractor's email address. So e-signatures has become a potential platform that is used for fraud. At the same time, e-signatures all come with something called an audit trail. So you can actually, as opposed to someone just forging your name on a piece of paper and then you have to hire someone to see if they can figure out if that's a forgery, with an audit trail you can go back and you can see the IP address, every time any individual interacted with that document, the time of day, the date, the place usually, unless it's been blocked. But there are protections involved with these technologies. So there's good and there's bad. There's the fact that e-signatures and very soon e-notarization in California it's very advanced, and there are all kinds of protections. But the reality is, if you get the wrong person figuring out how to scam someone, they're going to use it to scam someone. Cryptocurrency. So Caleb and I are involved in legislation in California. We're part of a collaborative that works on trying to improve consumer legislation. So we all know how legislation usually gets made. There are private interests that have money and they lobby and they get changes made to legislation, or they introduce legislation that benefits them, sometimes disadvantages consumers in some way. So we're part of a coalition of legal services organizations and other public interest groups who are trying to find ways to improve legislation so that it's friendlier to consumers. And so one of the things that has come up recently is cryptocurrency. And we were just discussing this. So cryptocurrency is becoming the biggest platform for criminals. I mean, it's basically perfect for criminals because you can transfer value anywhere, instantly, costless, anonymously, almost impossible to trace at this point. And so it's being used for crime on a level that actually could have been anticipated, but on a level where, I mean, Western Union used to be the platform for criminals. It doesn't compare. It's nowhere close to what cryptocurrency is right now. And it's only going to increase. So you can see what the losses were the last couple of years in the billions of dollars through cryptocurrency. So the challenge that we've had when we're looking at the legislation that's been introduced is some of the legislation is an attempt to fit cryptocurrency into the current paradigm that is used to legislate banks and other financial institutions. The problem with that is it's very different and it somewhat legitimizes it. And we don't know where it's going to be in a few years. Right now, cryptocurrency is, some people look at it as an investment, very speculative investment. Other people look at it as a tool. And criminals look at it as the greatest tool they've ever seen. So that's something that we're looking at when it comes to legislation, but where it's going to be in a year or two from now, it's impossible to say. I don't know, obviously. Remote monitoring and management. This is something that Caleb mentioned. These are the remote access tools that have become pretty much ubiquitous at this point. So probably even 5 years ago, if someone had said, okay, let me take over control of your computer, you would have been like, what are you talking about? You're not taking over control of my computer. But now, everybody does it all the time. When I'm on calls with IT departments, they're constantly taking over our computers and doing things remotely, and it's just how business is done now. But it's a great tool for criminals. Caleb had mentioned the type of situation where an individual gets scammed that way. I had one client a few years ago during COVID. He was contacted by Amazon, which was obviously not Amazon. He received, I think it was an email, it said that he had bought something for $40, which he didn't recognize. So it was on an email that said Amazon. It looked just like an Amazon email. And so he called the 800 number that was on that page. Amazon.com. He said, I don't recognize this. It says I spent $40. I didn't buy anything at Amazon. And so the guy said, okay, and then somehow talked him into having one of these RMMs installed on his computer. And then went into our client's bank account, transferred $40,000 from his HELOC into his checking account, and then said, I accidentally credited you $40,000 instead of 40. I need you to wire it to me. And if you don't do it right now, I'm gonna lose my job. Which is exactly what Caleb was just talking about. And so he did it. He wired $40,000. The criminal went back into his HELOC, took another $40,000 out, put it in his checking account after he had withdrawn the $40,000, and said, it didn't work, you're gonna have to do it again. And he did it again. He did it 3 times. So yeah, that's technology. It's amazing, but it's also frightening. Next slide, please. All right, you're up.
All right, so with all of that, it's easy to feel helpless, but we do want to give you some tools. There are some steps that you can take when you are scammed. The first resource here, number one, is the government resources that we have. So contacting the police, contacting local law enforcement like the district attorney. There are also different government agencies. So IC3 is the Internet Crime Complaint Center. That's run by the FBI, and you can make reports there. You can also report to the FTC and another agency, the CFPB, that's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Oftentimes, the organizations are only collecting data, but even if you're reporting to them, that's something that is important to do so that they actually know where to direct public resources in terms of enforcement measures that they can take. The police will also investigate different crimes. Again, with scammers, it's very difficult to find them, but it's always worth a shot. Number two, for seniors and dependent adults, we have Adult Protective Services. That's a county-run agency, and they're able to offer social services, and they'll also do their own investigation of the situation. They're especially able to help when there are victimizations by caregivers or other family members. They can get involved sort of as a third party that's neutral and able to sort out what exactly happened. For scams involving a bank transaction, always report to the bank. In fact, there is a part of the California Penal Code that says that if you give notice to a financial institution of identity theft, then they are legally required to give you the documents related to that transaction within 10 days. And if they don't do that, there's a $100 per day penalty that they're legally supposed to pay. For identity theft, you should always file an identity theft report. It's an easy website to remember, identitytheft.gov. That's through the Federal Trade Commission. And with that, you're able to use it to dispute issues with creditors. It's a very simple report to do, and it actually does have legally binding effect. So it's an easy tool at your disposal. As always, with identity theft, you want to monitor your credit report using tools such as annualcreditreport.com and making sure also to request a credit freeze and a fraud alert. You can do that for an extended period of time as a victim of identity theft with the different credit bureaus. For technology-related fraud, always make sure that you clean whatever device was compromised. So for example, if you have that remote management software, remove it. Might as well make sure that you have all the security updates and that you're all good to go there. For family fraud, everything in the estate planning context is up to you. You can revoke it at any time. You can take back a power of attorney. You can change your will. You can change your trust, whatever it may be, and do that if you have been victimized by a family member or some other beneficiary.
Peter wants us to open up to questions, so do you want to just wrap these two slides up and take questions?
Yeah, I mean, this is just a kind of a summary. The end goal that we have today is for you to protect yourself. So recognizing these scam attempts, making sure that your devices are up to date, and recognizing just that high pressure tactic that they will commonly use. And always being cautious of people you don't know. Do you want me to talk about legal remedies, or should we open it up?
No, I think just mention it.
All right, and so Jamie mentioned that we're part of a consumer coalition working on legislation. That's actually one of the legal remedies that we're hoping to better off to put consumers on a better playing field with financial institutions, because financial institutions are often the first point of entry for these scams. They have access to a consumer's history, they know exactly what type of transactions they're normally making, and they know exactly how to detect atypical transactions, but they just aren't. So that's one thing there. There are general resources also for identity theft. Seniors can receive treble damages. So that's another tool that we're able to use in the law to encourage people to do the right thing. And at the end, hopefully, are we able to share these slides? Because there are a fair number of resources on these. But...
We can post this on our website, okay. So if you give me that, I will put it on the website.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Yeah, there are a bunch of different resources that you can check out. And I think that was it. If you have any questions.